Chapter 125, Chains from the Void, Part 2-2. Translator Strivon. An Weng was never one to reject order, but he demanded for order to be under his control. Right now, he had focused all of his energy on controlling the probing process. He was completely unable to attend to the internals of the human-faced arachnid, and even if he could, it would be useless. An Weng had once tried to filter through the chaos within the human-faced arachnid to create a complete model. However, he had failed against his expectations. This was because chaos was the nature of the human-faced arachnid. It could not be altered. As such, he had to use the kite line that was Zheng's Zyro to endure the chaos within the human-faced arachnid and maintain his basic intellect. Otherwise, he would be completely suppressed by the human-faced arachnid's instincts. But now, An Weng actually sensed the power of order within the human-faced arachnid. He never once doubted the results of his own research, so the answer became clear to him. An external power had made its way inside. There was no doubt about it. This power came from Mr. Spoil of War. This power had already been crushed to pieces by the devouring force of the human-faced arachnid, but it had somehow reassembled itself. Chaos once shattered would only become more chaotic. There was only one explanation that this power was able to restore itself. Its chaos was just a disguise. It was just a clever emulation. This made An Weng think of the faith product he had developed not too long ago. The faith product was merely a reflection of his train of thought. He originally wanted to carefully sort through and gather much more information. However, Fairchild's appearance destroyed his initial plans. From that moment onward, the situation grew more and more outrageous. The situation now had long since been unrecognizable. Though the simple recollection of memory was meaningless, the clear context of details was able to help one sort through their thought process. Tracing back from this train of thought, An Weng finally confirmed that a mistake had appeared in his previous judgment. The human-faced arachnid he consumed was not a spoil of war. It was an imitated product. Perhaps it was one of the faith products he had made. As far as he knew, that little toy had changed owners today. It had made its way to the hands of a certain teenager. From the taste of what he had consumed, this little toy was more advanced than his original version. It was to the extent that it could pass off as the real deal. This did not surprise An Weng. However, this teenager possessed some kind of inconceivable power of order. Additionally, through some special ability, this teenager stagnated the changes with the unbalanced state of the scales of truth time and time again. Ouyang Chen should be expressing his thanks to this teenager. Otherwise, he might not have had the time to erect his logic world. However, An Weng also recalled that this teenager should have been isolated from the logic world. Of course, this mystical little fellow made people furious. With his attention deviating in direction, An Weng's efforts of probing the mental plane was all wasted. He lost the sensing trail that could have led him to the gate of truth. Yet An Weng did not let fury and related emotions take over him. Instead, he cast the probing waves in the complete opposite direction. An Weng did a self-examination toward his human-faced arachnid, locking onto the element of order incompatible with the chaos and pushing it back. If he did not get rid of the interfering element, all the searching and probing would be useless. The vibrating sound of shaking chains increased in clarity, and its corresponding information continued to join and assemble. In the end, dark chains were formed, twisting, bending, and extending. It pierced the chaos housed within number 3 and shot out countlessly linked barbs in all directions. These barbs seeped everywhere within the human-faced arachnid. The situation was now much more troublesome than An Weng had initially judged. In this form, the power of order declared its invasion toward the human-faced arachnid. The end of the chains was long. It extended deeply into the depths of the mental plane. It was without a doubt that the mystical boy was connected at the other end. Wasn't his name Luo Nan? An Weng's thoughts coiled and knotted, forming an incorporeal chant. He had seen Luo Nan's basic information before, so locking onto Luo Nan's aura through the evolution field was more than enough for a secret-bound first oblatum. A highly fatal secret curse was gradually forming. The next time An Weng locked onto Luo Nan, he would unleash his curse without the slightest hesitation. The barrier between the mental and the material would be forcefully destroyed, and all his worries would be resolved. This was not the smartest way to go about things, but it was the most direct. Even though this would put him in a dangerously weak state, as a soul parasitically attached within the human-faced arachnid, he was going for it. And Weng's mind followed along the chains. With the aid of the human-faced arachnid, the sealed and chaotic structure of the logic world's space did not hinder him at all. In the process, An Weng accidentally affected the plane of reality, but now a new change was occurring to the situation. He had an approximate recollection of Luo Nan's last location before the logic world was erected. He locked onto that direction and scanned the plane of reality. And Weng was confident that he would lock onto his target in 2 seconds. The probing waves were able to smoothly cut out of the logic world. It was hard for Ouyang Chen to restrict the probing power of the human-faced arachnid. However, in the next moment, the external information that came over was not the scenery of the metropolis. Instead, it was a starry sky that made one dazed and lost. It was just that strange. And Went was dazed for just a moment before he soon woke up. The starry sky was the projection of someone's consciousness. He had made contact with Luo Nan. This boy seemed to be short of live combat experience. There were practically no counter-detection measures on the exchange of the mental plane. In an instant, the two sides were engaging in combat with short-reach weapons. Short A. And Weng was just about to unleash his deadly curse, but he had no choice but to stop. He never imagined that the scene of this person's consciousness would be this vast and grand. Indeed, though the power within was near non-existent, this sort of manifestation was an inconceivable accomplishment. This was merely the reconstruction of Luo Nan's perception. And Weng needed to trace back to the source and find the core of Luo Nan's consciousness. Yet behind this scene of a starry sky were the auras of countless living beings. They appeared here as stars, and together they established a hazy and vast structure. Moreover, the scene that was formed from Luo Nan's observations and perception could not be described as just vast. Luo Nan fully utilized the mental plane, and this included the logic world's reality. Though the starry sky was smooth and uniform, if one looked at the whole, it was actually filled with complicated and warped details. It was like a labyrinth. As for Luo Nan's core consciousness, it was hidden behind layers and layers of curtains. It was difficult to discern its location. If Luo Nan had created this starry sky structure by force, An Weng could collide against different sides to find his target via feedback. However, within this realm of pure perception, the more he looked, the easier it was for Luo Nan to lead him by the nose. In addition, from the perspective of a human-faced arachnid, this environment was like a pot of soup with a smell that pervaded everywhere. The human-faced arachnid began to get restless from an instinctual great terror. This spread An Weng's power thin. An Weng made a quick decision. He gave up probing on the plane of reality to stop wasting time. There were still the chains. The power of the dark chains continued to increase, restraining the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. It made number 3 feel uneasy, so An Weng simply strengthened this instinct of number 3 and had it search by following the chains backward. In any case, the master of these chains had to undoubtedly be Luo Nan. Number 3's probing suddenly halted. An enormous sense of oppression came at this very moment. It was like a storm of flames that came screaming from the end of the chains. The sudden increase in external pressure heated the chaotic essence of the human-faced arachnid into a pot of boiling oil. If the human-faced arachnid possessed awareness, the boiling of its instinct would surely cause it to scream loudly. It would scream danger, danger. This common yet different terrifying force came crashing down. Number 3's combat instincts were pressed to its limits. A battle through space exploded out in an instant. In the face of the human-faced arachnid's boiling instinct, An Weng's control ability plummeted to the minimum. He became like a small boat that was rocking up and down within a sea of lava. He could capsize at any moment. The situation was once again out of his control. He suddenly understood. Luo Nan absolutely was not on the other end of the chains. Instead, it was another damned human-faced arachnid, and an extremely powerful one at that. How could this be? Chapter 126, Colosseum, Part 1-2. Translator, Strivon. The sense of distance was instantly made clear. The two human-faced arachnids were far away from each other, the distance far exceeding the normal sensing limits of human-faced arachnids. In other words, they should not have made contact with each other. Then what was going on? Was this human-faced arachnid targeting number 3 specifically, targeting him for doom? Before An Weng could understand the root cause for the change, the clash between the human-faced arachnids reached a fiery hot state. The hazy starry sky was filled with the powerful pressure of hostility. Number 3's body was being forcefully distorted. Every action was being resisted by a force that was both material and incorporeal. It was because of this that the chaos energy within number 3 began to circulate at high speeds. It was like a boiler that was crushing and burning all the fuel within, providing number 3 with an even more powerful internal energy. For An Weng, this was simply a disaster. He had given up his fleshly body and placed his soul within number 3's body, realizing a partial fusion. However, they had ultimately yet to merge completely as one. A portion still remained independent, and it was the most critical portion, the intelligent portion. After number 3 started the boiler, a tenth of the mass of An Weng's soul was soon evaporated. Many memories and resources were instantly erased, causing An Weng to be slightly dazed. He stayed like this until Zheng's Zyro was affected as well, letting out a miserable shriek. Only then did An Weng suddenly come to. Even the kite string was about to be severed. How could these chains be so strong? As self-deprecating thoughts flashed in his mind, An Weng forced himself to forget the imminent threat. He poured his power into number 3 to try to control it and struggle free from the chains. The dark chains were the sole channel that connected the two human-faced arachnids. It was also the main battlefield where the human-faced arachnids clashed. If An Weng wanted to destroy this situation, the most effective method would be to sever the chains. With An Weng's aid, number 3's power was suddenly raised to the next level. Its 8 limbs waved in the void as it did its utmost to thrash and try to withdraw backward. The dark chains straightened, perfectly taut. A pulling and clashing force activated simultaneously upon the chains, causing the chains' vibrations to increase in intensity. The vibrations converged as one, before ultimately becoming a sharp hum like that of a rubber band on the verge of snapping. Just missing a bit more, just missing a bit more. The more intense the clash between the human-faced arachnids, the more awful the inner pressure of number three's boiler became. The mass of An Weng's soul was continually eroded, but he had to continue to accelerate this process to ensure number three's power output. This was the stupidest consumption of his soul of all, but thanks to these pressing matters, An Weng had no choice. In this moment, An Weng felt like he and the dark chains were like two fizzling and burning fuses. They were waiting to see who would be the first to burn out, ignite the bomb, and explode into pieces. The truth is above. Hum. The prayer and the vibrations occurred simultaneously, and another clash exploded on the chains. The powerful assault of energy broke through the limits of the dark chains at last, causing the chains to lose its special structure as it shattered and dispersed with a hum. Number three's body suddenly stopped as the chains broke. However, An Weng was not happy at all. By now, the mass of his soul had shrunk to 2/3 of its peak. An enormous quantity of memory of resources was burnt to ash. Even with his resolute will, he experienced a moment of daze. There was more. In the final stage of the clash, An Weng no longer had the energy to maintain things elsewhere. Zheng's Zyro, the kite string, was severed. Number three floated within the hazy starry sky. The striking starlight filled everywhere, but there were no clear trails remaining. It was as if number three had lost its way within the starry sky. It had lost its bearings. An Weng took a slow breath and sorted through the great mess of his soul. In addition, he tried to strengthen his control over number three. However, something occurred right when he was gradually permeating and spreading into number three's chaotic region with his soul mass. The inner pressure of number three's boiler plummeted quickly, and an explosion was ignited. A pain like that of a poisonous flame assaulted An Weng. He forcefully endured it, maintaining a bit of clarity. However, his mind still sunk heavily down. Number three slowly turned its body around. It became restless again by instinct. Moreover, this restlessness was even more intensive than during the bitter battle just before. At this moment, An Weng heard a low and fine sound. It was like the background noise that always existed in the metropolis. It was not really noticeable, but it was everywhere. Looking into this noise would yield an abundance of miscellaneous information. Additionally, within this subtle noise that people found hard to ignore was a river that was shadowy like it was dirty. It flowed noiselessly. A massive and ugly body floated out from within. The body spread its limbs, its demonic eyes flickered, and it instantly appeared next to number three. By the time the entirety of its stooped body floated above the shadowy waters, it directly faced number three. From number three's perspective, this human-faced arachnid that An Weng had locked onto was clearly a factor bigger than number three itself. Its figure was more realistic and more solid. It gave off a pressure that assaulted one's face. It caused number three's restlessness to grow harder to control. Number three's instinct was to escape, but it still remained within the star realm. This had nothing to do with courage. It was because of the incorporeal power of order that was embedded within this hazy starry sky, causing this realm to act as a bizarre prison. Even if this realm was boundless and vast, Number 3 was locked firmly inside. The only ending that was left was the decision between victory and defeat, between life and death. It was those mysterious chains. Although it appeared to have shattered, it had actually transformed from the material into the incorporeal. It used an even more inconceivable form to establish order. It revealed a power of constraint that was even more inescapable. An Weng came to a clear understanding of this just now. The human-faced arachnids had already engaged in another round of combat. Human-faced arachnids were not like intelligent life forms. They did not speak any nonsense. They were just propelled by their instincts, and the two sides began crossing blades once again. Loud rumbles rang forth as they collided. Just a single clash, and number 3's left mandible was forcefully chomped and consumed by the massive human-faced arachnid's stomach. At the same time, number 3's sharp limb pierced the human body portion of the massive human-faced arachnid. The wound gurgled as it ignited, and bloody flames sprayed everywhere. The two human-faced arachnids let out noiseless roars of pain at the same time, but the direct, wrestling-like fight did not change a bit. It was as if they had returned to the Colosseum of the ancient times. The most bloody of forms were used to please the spectators. And so, just who should they be pleasing in this moment? An Weng strove to maintain his train of thoughts with the human-faced arachnid as it clashed. The change with the chains showed an exquisite shifting of the power of order. This was not a change that was made spontaneously. This change existed within the framework that encompasses this starry sky. Who did this framework belong to? And Weng knew the answer, but in this hazy starry sky, even a shrewd person like him would find it hard to lock onto the man behind the scenes in a short period of time. Unless number 3's body shook violently once more. It was always at a complete disadvantage during the wrestling. Right now, half its ugly face had been chomped away by its powerful foe. It was missing half of its 6 demonic eyes, and its aura suddenly grew weak. There would not be a chance of victory if things continued this way. And Weng used a mere 1/10 of a second to make a final decision. He did not spend much more time on the corresponding choice as well. A dark ball appeared in the inner clairvoyance of his mind, in the mass of his soul. It was covered densely with strange markings. This was the deadly secret curse that he had formed when he sought to kill Luo Nan as fast as possible. Without even the slightest of hesitation, An Weng crushed the ball with his soul's strength, causing the secret curse to burst and shatter. The deadly negative energy swept through the mass of his soul. The pain of his mind was indescribable by words, but similar ways could be used to vent his feelings. And Weng's intent surged, and he roared explosively on the mental plane. Luo Nan's Chapter 126, Colosseum, Part 2-2. Translator, Strivon. Incorporeal waves swept the starry sky, spreading far and wide. Only An Weng knew the true purpose contained within these waves. With just an additional expansion, only pure energy was revealed, and the waves pushed outward. Under the effects of this power, the lights of the stars that filled the sky became like candles within a storm. They flickered on the verge of extinguishing. Actually, not one of these stars could be put out. Though this hazy star river was a projection of Luo Nan's perception, its information was purely scenic. What An Weng did was purify the probing waves so that he could follow the path of projection. He took key information and directed it back, injecting it into the material plane. The power from the scales of truth and the information of the deadly secret curse merged together with the instinct of the human-faced arachnid. The resulting penetrating nature of the waves was incomparable. Whether it was the logic world or the scene of Luo Nan's consciousness, they were both unable to block the probing waves. The waves pushed onward layer by layer, and soon An Weng reaped some results. On the material plane, within the metropolis, the flames of life flickered. There was not any substantial damage, but the scope of influence contained information that was like the crazy talk of delusions. The waves flowed, spreading to countless tens of thousands of people. Most of the information would be unconsciously filtered, while a small portion would form a relatively clear awareness in people. Though the information was lacking a counterpart, causing people to naturally disregard it, there still remained a finite portion of information that would make contact with those possessing keener perception. Those that were familiar with it, like Luo Nan, would respond by instinct, and An Weng would get feedback. Though it was limited, it was already enough. Nanster is someone calling out to you. Zhu Lei looked around, but he was unable to see where this feeling was coming from. He was rather puzzled for a time. Luo Nan went, "Oh," but did not answer. He remained looking up at the sky. The autumn rain ran through the night, with no end in sight. The power over at Frost River reality had yet to be restored. The evacuation work of the trapped civilians was approaching its end. The sounds of people grew thinner and thinner. The curtain of night appeared pitch black over yonder, while the silhouette of the buildings looked murky. The cleanup work of the surrounding area was more or less complete. Yulin Hotel's sniper point was confirmed to be cleared of hostile forces. The members of the society were all on Yulin Block. This area now served as the command center of the government and the military. It was also the place where new information was the most abundant. Military warships slowly entered the airspace above, representing the military's full involvement with the matter. The warships hovered above the city area in a rarely seen sight. It drew the gazes of several civilians in the area, their fingers pointing all around. Luo Nan also gazed upward, but his eyes were directed to the area of Frost River reality. The marvels of the logic world was embodied within the group of pitch-black skyscrapers. It existed behind the void, where the naked eye could not reach. Zhu Lei did not take not receiving an answer personally. He copied Luo Nan and raised his head to look at the group of connected buildings far in the distance. Despite this, no matter how he looked, he was unable to see why. He could only shake his head. The ways of this current world are truly bizarre. A single man has the power to pinch out a section of space to do as he pleases. No wonder my master says, in the way of martial arts, if one can't adapt and improve the self, then one will wake up the next day and be wiped out. And staring in the same direction as them were all the members of the society. The vast majority of onlookers were still grasping with the sudden disappearance of the great number of terrorists. Luo Nan's group had clearer answers privy to them. Papercut's eyes were wide as saucers as he looked in concentration. He mumbled, "So President Ouyang had his eyes on them all along. Logic world, eh? I never heard even a smidgen of news about this in the society. He sure cheated some people into some good misery. He's just taking advantage of the situation, nothing more." Red Fox was the only member of the society that had made direct contact with Ouyang Chen tonight. He more or less had the responsibility to explain things. He flashed a glance at Logic World and sneered. To enforce rules upon others, wouldn't one need to show off might as powerful as thunder? The Logic World has been erected, and the explosive power is sufficient. I really want to see the faces of those in the order." As he spoke, Red Fox rested his gaze upon Luo Nan's face. Yang Chen had given Luo Nan an evaluation of "the bright way seems dim," and Luo Nan had shown practical results time and time again. However, when his gaze landed on such an introverted and infantile face, he could not help but size him up. "Do you see anything?" Luo Nan looked into the sky, giving no response whatsoever. To the side, Zhu Lei coughed to catch Luo Nan's attention, but he still did not respond. Zhu Lei could only poke at him with his hand. Only then did Luo Nan come to, like waking from a dream. He glanced around. Right now, Yuan was acting as the full representative of the society. She engaged in communications with the government and the military. She was so busy that she walked off and disappeared. Bamboo Pole, as the technical member, followed her. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan walked over to the military medical vehicle. It was unknown what they were up to. Cat Eyes appeared to be very tired. She found a place to idle away. Only Zhu Lei was left by Luo Nan's side, while the direction of Red Fox's gaze spelled his intentions clearly. A fierce contention had occurred between Red Fox and Luo Nan not too long ago, so it was hard for them to avoid awkwardness when meeting again. Luo Nan lacked the experience to resolve such an atmosphere. Zhu Lei could not really help him, so Luo Nan could only blink. "What did you say just now?" Red Fox did not get angry. He just reached out with his hand and pointed toward Frost River reality. "You're proficient at mental perception. You can see things clearer than I do. You see a doorway of any sort. Can you answer me? Are you not looking?" "No, I saw a little bit of something earlier." Though he answered in a businesslike fashion, Luo Nan had adjusted socially. He thought for a bit and answered, "It is a sort of refined structure that interferes mutually with the material and the mental planes. It is like the shield of truth. Yet it is also very different from the shield of truth. This really is different." When facing Luo Nan's confusing logic, Red Fox found it hard to continue the conversation. He could only force a laugh and say, "Extraordinary powers manifest themselves in such a way." His response counted as giving Luo Nan face. He did not say the word nonsense. Luo Nan was silent for a time, but this was not because he was stumped by Red Fox. Instead, it was what his clairvoyance had yielded him. It was far too complicated to be described by words. In addition, the results of his clairvoyance was a sort of amendment to his past knowledge. According to his past understandings, the mental plane was a sort of deep and multi-layered structure. It was like countless curtains stacked atop one another. Each layer was distinct, and the closer the layer was to the material plane, the thicker the curtain. The bottommost portion was merged with the material plane. Here, the mental plane and the material plane interfered with each other, the degree of which was fixed and depended on the amount of energy. Therefore, the mutual interference of the mental and material planes occurred upon every person. However, normal people could only produce tiny amounts of interference and was pretty much negligible. On the other hand, the effects of interference were much clearer in the case of ability users. The Shield of Truth was the most powerful method of interference that Luo Nan had ever seen. It was also the clearest and explicit method. He believed it to be the benchmark for the application of interference between the mental and material planes. As for Rui Wen, the merging of the fleshly body and the spiritual soul as one was a different sort of state. It was like comparing apples and oranges. However, the interference state of the logic world broke Luo Nan's understanding that had formed not too long ago. Under the senses of his clairvoyance, the many layers of curtains that formed the mental plane unfurled. There was no longer the sense of layers. Instead, the layers overlapped, distorted, and even tore. Some layers that were at a considerable distance from the material plane were forcefully coalesced together. It was to the point that even the lower layer of the curtain also had an interference effect come about. They all tangled together into one mass. This was the third state of the relationship between the mental plane and the material plane that Luo Nan had ever seen. It was also the most complicated state. Chapter 127, Change in the Turbid Clouds, Part 1-2. Translator, Strivon. Through this complex method of interference between the mental plane and the material plane, Yang Chen realized a peeling of the material plane. The virtual and the real both appeared, establishing a spatial rift that was like the real world. The rules and laws were within the rift. However, the delicacies were not as easy as constructing skyscrapers. The deeper details would only tax the mind to the extent that the gains did not outweigh the losses. Luo Nan just observed the general outline. He did not continue to be entangled within. To explain such things to Red Fox would involve far too much information. Quite a bit of it was of Luo Nan's individual understanding. He lacked confidence in expressing himself with words, so he did not talk for a time. He heard the sound of a car come extremely close to him while he pondered about how to respond. Luo Nan was about to check it out when his neck suddenly tightened. Someone was pulling his collar, dragging him. His back collided with the car. "Don't waste time. Get in the car now." Zhang Yingying emerged from the vehicle, urging Luo Nan with impatience. She had brought over a military medical vehicle. The space in the back was sealed and rather large. It could load several dozen people without any problems. What's so pressing? Luo Nan thought that another mission was given to them, and he did not bicker with Zhang Yingying. Instead, he nodded to Red Fox and entered the vehicle first. Zhu Lei, Red Fox, and the others followed behind him. They went in one by one. However, everyone soon became a bit dumbstruck. The scene inside was a bit different from what everyone had imagined. The space was relatively narrow for various equipment and instruments were packed densely within. When the few people went inside, the space became a bit cramped. To the hospital. Bai Xinyan had taken off her jacket and changed into the white gown of a doctor. She even wore sterilized gloves on her hands. She was dressed all out. Luo Nan stared stupidly, while Zhang Yingying next to him took off his clothes. She pulled off his outer garments and lifted his undergarments. "Woo," spoke Zhu Lei with emotion. Luo Nan's face soared in temperature with these many people in the car. "Hey." Zhang Yingying outright ignored him. Her fingers crawled under Luo Nan's undergarments, and she touched the contours of the muscles of his back and waist quite impudently. Though this body is F-rank, a candidate for disability, he isn't that thin and weak. Her soft and smooth fingers slid around. They felt warm, but they made Luo Nan quiver and shudder. He had forgotten the words that he was going to say. Looking at his body fat percentage, his body is still lacking compared to those of his age. However, it is nothing compared to his soul strength. "Stay still." Bai Xinyan yelled at the squirming and struggling Luo Nan, and stuck the electrical leads of some device to various locations on Luo Nan's body. Now it was quite awkward for Luo Nan to move even if he wanted to. As he was forced to obediently let Zhang Yingying take off his upper clothes, he asked with helplessness, "What the hell are you all doing?" You must feel great showing yourself off. You've turned into an incinerator in the blink of an eye. Don't worry, I'll reduce your fever for you. Zhang Yingying was acting as an ad hoc nurse. She was quite amused as she jabbed and poked Luo Nan's body with her fingers. She played around quite delightfully. Bai Xinyan saw how Luo Nan's body temperature was rising, and she stopped Zhang Yingying from teasing him. She then began to calibrate her instrument, and at the same time she explained, "No one knows when the effects of the shield of truth will disappear. Right now, the growth rate of your soul strength is quite dangerous. One misstep and your soul strength will overtake your body. There won't even be the chance to save you. Therefore, we need to keep you under observation for 24 hours. No matter how good the equipment here is, there's nothing like the peace of mind of being at a hospital." Luo Nan smiled bitterly. "It can't be that serious, can it? We're just being prepared for the worst-case scenario." There was a de-emphasis in Bai Xinyan's tone, but her mind was set. The troubles in the future were certainly going to be large. A bit of this could already be seen based on the way the previous 2 generations of the Luo family had left society. In addition, Luo Nan's current troubles were not limited to just the imbalance between his body and soul. As Bai Xinyan's words hung in the air, Red Fox frowned. He unconsciously extended his hand and pressed against his ear. His gaze turned toward Luo Nan. Zhu Lei saw his actions to the side and said, "Hey, did you hear something too?" Red Fox motioned for Zhu Lei to keep quiet. Then he made a few gestures to Paper Cut. After the logic world was erected, the psychic wave network entered a frozen state. Even now, it has yet to be restored. Communicating secretly between us is now way less convenient than before. Papercut read his gestures and soon nodded. He closed his eyes to sense for a moment, and his expression turned grave. "Soul calling." "Yep, soul calling," said Bai Xinyan as she let out a rarely heard sigh. "I don't know what disaster your boss Luo has provoked now. An Weng is clearly stuck in the logic world. His situation is dire. However, An Weng doesn't care about the damage to himself. He still tries to lock onto Luo Nan's position. In addition, he has already succeeded, more or less." Within the vehicle, all their gazes were cast onto Luo Nan. The latter had nothing to say. With all those leads connected to his body, he could only act as a puppet to be moved about by others. The door to the vehicle opened at this very moment. Cat Eyes, who had been idling away and lost, entered the vehicle as well. Then Bai Xinyan said, "Sister He and Bamboo Pole will move with the military. Right now, all our people are accounted for. There's no need to delay. No matter who we are facing, our #1 priority is to create distance." The car accelerated as she spoke, and soon the building complex of Frost River reality was tossed to the background. This was the same as withdrawing from the battlefield. 2 minutes passed, with several people exchanging glances. "We should be out of the range of the soul calling." The group let out sighs of relief. They could finally disregard the intermittent callings within their ears. Right now, the military medical vehicle was already over a straight-line distance of 10 kilometers from Frost River reality. As a secret-bound First Oblatum, it would be difficult for An Weng to contact Luo Nan at these distances. In addition, An Weng was isolated within the logic world. However, Luo Nan was not particularly optimistic. He was not hopeful that a moving vehicle would be able to remove the pressure from An Weng. This thing known as distance was not that significant to the current An Weng to Luo Nan. The twisted and tangled state of the multi-layered curtains of the logic world caused distortions to appear in the distance of the mental plane. In a situation where the distance did not change on the material plane, there appeared a deviation between 2 points on the mental plane. It was like the overused example of space folding. Take space to be like a piece of paper. There are 2 ends that are away from each other, and there was originally a great distance separating them. However, they would become within reach when the paper folds and the 2 ends came together. In regards to this sort of special structural pattern, Luo Nan could do more than just observe. In fact, after An Weng had driven his human-faced arachnid to consume the high-imitation human-faced arachnid in Qingli's body, Luo Nan immediately discovered a hole and a chance. Through the dark chains, Luo Nan established a connection between the Order of Justice's human-faced arachnid and the wraith sign hidden far away in the Bloodflame Order. He utilized the special characteristics of the logic world. He took advantage of the opportunity and built a colosseum. Or perhaps one could call it an altar. Using the format pyramid as the foundation, Luo Nan erected the framework of the altar. Luo Nan was quite familiar with this action, so it was effortless. There was only one thing different this time. It was the span. Luo Nan could make use of the logic world, and An Weng could do the same as well. This was because the logic world existed within the seriously distorted mental plane. An Weng's evil intentions could not be blocked. Things were quite dangerous when An Weng began his assault with his evil intent. The projection of the scales of truth emerged in Luo Nan's mind. The most notable aspects were the unstable black and white plates moving up and down. A seemingly familiar voice seeped into his heart. Those who yearn for the truth will find themselves on the 2 sides of the scales. Chapter 127, Change in the Turbid Clouds, Part 2-2. Translator Strivon. Luo Nan felt quite an intricate sensation. When he had erected the framework of the altar, he was able to transcend past that world. He was not directly influenced by being the sacrificer and received only benefits. All this was possible as long as he could support it. However, now the projection of the scales of truth entered as An Weng's evil intent came attacking over. That feeling of supremacy was offended, and the altar's framework, he was supporting faced erosion and collision by external forces. He had never encountered this kind of situation before. However, this was natural now that he thought about it. The scales of truth was the paramount holy entity of the order of justice. It could act as a sacrificial vessel and could be regarded as another altar frame. An Weng had made his way upon one of the plates, becoming a sacrifice of the scales of truth. One thing was being used for 2 things, possessing dissimilar purposes and different natures. A clash was inevitable. In addition, An Weng was not just having the 2 frameworks collide together. His penetrating evil intent had locked onto his target. He clearly wanted to pull Luo Nan into the depths of the maelstrom. It seemed that An Weng had succeeded. Luo Nan tried to wash his mind of the scales of truth, but it was useless. The thing grew clearer and clearer, especially the side with the white plate. There seemed to be a possessed force that drew in his mind, giving him no chance to escape. Looking deeply into the source of this power yielded what seemed to be a structural pattern that was vaguely like that of the shield of truth. His body grew tense from inside out. It was as if he was bound by incorporeal threads. Luo Nan struggled in his discomfort, but he never expected the instrument connected to his body to ring in alarm. The collective gazes of everyone in the vehicle became focused on him. Zhang Yingying, the ad hoc nurse, immediately raised her hands up high in the air. I didn't do nothing. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't have caused this to happen. Through an AR display, Bai Xinyan integrated the data of the instrument, and various numbers were arranged and displayed. The laymen who saw the display were all blinking crazily. However, everyone was able to see sudden minute fluctuations appear on a near-level frequency graph. There has been a change in the strength of the fleshly body, though the scope is quite small. Bai Xinyan's gaze swiveled over, flitting past Luo Nan's face. There hasn't been a crack on the shield of truth, right? About this, I'm not sure. Luo Nan scratched his cheeks with his hands. He was a bit embarrassed. Though the matter was hidden and he could not speak of the details, he was not a resolute and courageous boy. Instead, he took on the attitude of uncertainty. Bai Xinyan raised an eyebrow, but she did not say anything. Zhang Yingying had already smacked Luo Nan's shoulders. You're not sure? What do you mean not sure? The problem isn't on my end. Actually, it was. Luo Nan got himself in this deep and was forced to admit to himself that things had gotten big now. Right now, Luo Nan could sense an enormous heat source existing by his side. He was familiar with this feeling of order. It was undoubtedly Fairchild. Luo Nan combined the situation in the logic world with the fragments of An Qingli's memory that he had received from the high imitation human-faced arachnid to produce a conclusion. He did not know whether to laugh or cry from his conclusion. Perhaps he and Fairchild were the same. An Weng had acted first and asked questions later against them, sending them to become the underlying mass atop the scales of truth. Had Luo Nan been placed upon the altar to become one of the sacrifices? This was truly an example of irony. The sense of supremacy that always came when erecting the altar's frame caused Luo Nan to lose accuracy in his conclusions. When An Weng exhausted his soul and forced his way over, Luo Nan had believed that his wraith sign held the upper hand. Luo Nan's behavior of being engrossed in the thrill of the hunt was too careless. After making it past the dangerous situation of near destruction, An Weng immediately used decisive methods to give Luo Nan a good lesson. If Luo Nan's conjecture was correct, An Weng had captured the link where Fairchild blessed him with the shield of truth. An Weng used incomprehensible and arcane techniques of the order to achieve success in one move. Moreover, the matter would not end here. Right now, it seemed that Luo Nan had already replaced Fairchild, Ouyang Chen, and similar characters. Luo Nan had become An Weng's #1 target to deal with. Luo Nan's ability to draw enmity caused even himself to feel helpless. The most vital matter was to naturally have the situation get back on track. Whether it be President Ouyang or Fairchild, weren't these two being idle for too long? Perhaps An Weng is focusing and pressuring Fairchild, and Luo Nan got involved as a result. Everyone in the vehicle could obviously see that Fairchild had given Luo Nan a blessing. Papercut frowned as he guessed this, all of a sudden going on this train of thought. Red Fox spoke in a low voice. It's also possible that he's being directly targeted, like striking a cow with a mountain in the way. Zhang Yingying gave Red Fox a thumbs up in great approval. That's right. Then we need to take defensive measures. We are in no condition to do so right now. Bai Xinyan shook her head. She lifted her wristband to make a call. Soon she was connected. Sister He, about the matter with your boss stirring up trouble. Even being separated by the logic world can't stop An Weng. I propose to push President Ouyang to resolve this matter ASAP. Luo Nan's head hung down, having lost the face to meet others in the eyes for a time. However, he ultimately would not distract himself in social matters for too long. He also could not count on the help of others. His mind soon concentrated upon the altar frames. Luo Nan could not relax for even a moment when it came to An Weng, even if it appeared that the old man was rapidly growing weaker. There's not much time left, and Weng was clear about his own state. Within the Colosseum, half of number three's limbs had been chomped and consumed. It appeared spiritless, and it lacked the strength to fight back. The mass of An Weng's soul trembled and shrank. All that remained was half of the mass at its peak. Though this was all that was left, the two maelstroms of altar frames tore at each other, with the Colosseum being second to the scales of truth. The scales of truth was the major aspect. Since Luo Nan was placed upon the scales, he could only be placed on the truth side. And Weng had been catching up to that mass, but Luo Nan's mass was absolutely abnormal. The combined mass of he and Fairchild's caused the projection of the scales of truth to instantly slip toward the unbalanced state. In such a dangerous moment, and Weng's mind grew even more callous and firm. Though it was clearly an illusion, the projection of the scales of truth seemed to possess the majesticness of a true holy entity, the essence of immortality. And Weng could withstand the ignition of his soul for a short period time. He could even obtain a stronger tension and realize even more excellent results. Bang! It was as if a bowstring was plucked with great force. The probing waves swept deep through space the instant the vibration sounded. It was far more tyrannical and penetrating than the last time. In this instant, it did not matter whether it was the logic world or the hazy starry sky. They were both practically transparent to him. His consciousness spread freely to every nook and cranny, to every level. A layer of cloud and mist accompanied the transparency. It was what the probing waves accessed on the material plane. It was the phenomenon formed from mutual interference. The cloudy mist seemed to grow denser, and it soon caused the night sky of the logic world to become a bit dirty. Bang! Another sound vibrated, broadcasting out. The visibility within the logic world plummeted once more. It was as if a thick fog had rolled in, and the three large buildings were practically warping. Ouyang, Fairchild had a bit of his telepathic senses focused on the projection of the scales of truth. He could indirectly touch An Weng's current state. Fairchild felt a bad omen come over An Weng, and he warned Ouyang Chen. Before Ouyang Chen could respond, electric fire suddenly leaped from the upper layers of the hazy mist. The arc stabbed their eyes, and it came smashing down like a redwood that was felled. Why was smashing the word to describe it? Because in the blink of an eye, the bolt of light twisted and coiled. Behind its powerful glow was a turbid and solid shadow with the appearance of a clenched fist. The chaotic electric arcs coming from it were the fist's fluttering hairs. Looking at the whole, it was simply the giant arm of a monstrous beast, and the arm came rumbling down. Chapter 128, Shadow Realm, Part 1-2. Translator, Strivon. When the giant arm came smashing down, it seemed like the verisimilitudinous night sky of the logic world collapsed. Space warped and shook. Fine ripples could be clearly perceived. The ripples washed over everyone's skin, causing most of them to shiver and shudder. A corresponding chill emerged from the bottom of everyone's hearts, as huge distortions suddenly appeared in the projection of the scales of truth at the center of the three buildings. Its luminance dimmed, and the giant shadow arm swallowed it completely. The phantasmal projection clearly could not stop the arm at all. The shadowy giant arm bound in flaring electricity came rushing straight down, directly striking the rooftop of Frost River reality. The arm showed no signs of slowing down during this time. Even though particularly strong shockwaves could not be seen, an acidic corrosive power seemed to run straight to the bottom of the building. A fracture that ran for over 30 meters split open the buildings in the blink of an eye. Then rippling lines of reverberations spread in all directions from the fracture. The entirety of Frost River reality crumbled and collapsed, and only now could the terrifying explosion be heard. Regardless if they were facing Frost River reality, the glass walls of the three surrounding skyscrapers were nearly completely destroyed. The electric flames around the giant arm were like a liquid as it splashed out. The bolts of electricity were like countless living snakes. They pierced into the surrounding three buildings and soared wantonly. Bays, who had been knocked to the ground floor by Fairchild, crawled up. He had just so happened to be right under Frost River reality. He watched Frost River reality crumble and collapse, and he felt the pressure from the electric flames. Without saying a word, he rammed his way into one of the skyscrapers, rolled in an evasive maneuver, and managed to dodge the electric flames in the end. He had responded quickly, and his luck was good as well, but the others were not able to be like him. One Oblatum knight was struck with misfortune head-on. He was located on the side of a building facing Frost River reality, and the chaotic spray of electric flames surrounded him. There was no escape. As the electric arcs struck his body, he sought to rely on the extraordinary powers gained from bitter cultivation to withstand it. However, an unimaginable force acted upon his sturdy torso in an instant. His limbs twisted substantially, and it was like a pair of demonic hands were kneading his body into a ball. He was kneaded into a mangled meatball, and he rolled chaotically on the destroyed floor of the building. The most frightening thing of all was that this Oblatum knight was not spared a quick death. Smothered screeches sounded from the meatball again and again, the sound full of misery and despair. Even the face of the powerful Bays turned dark green from he saw such a scene. He rammed his way deeper into the large building without even looking back. The further away he was from the electric flames, the better. That's not lightning. At the very least, it's not pure lightning. Luo Nan could approximately see the source of this wave of lightning. It was the same as the mist produced by An Weng's probing waves. It came from a violent interference between the mental and material planes. This sort of interference completely lacked rules and patterns. It was chaotic and berserk. The final result was both this chaos and the powerful ionization effect of lightning. Nevertheless, the spray of lightning covered nearly a kilometer in diameter. Just how astonishing was the intensity of the soul's strength that acted upon the material plane. Using Luo Nan himself as a standard, was it about 10,000 times more powerful, or 1,000,000 times more powerful? This was not realistic. Even the feeling Luo Nan got from the enigmatic and unfathomable President Yang Chen was far from matching this sort of intensity. There must be some special method being applied. Luo Nan's attention was forcefully drawn in. However, the region was destined to lack a good target for him to observe. The terrifying force within the shadow did not merely cause destruction on the material plane. An assault blasted out on the mental plane just a hair later. It was like the magma spray of an erupting volcano. It pelted down in a torrent. Luo Nan was in a pure observation mode. Its effect made it so that he did not receive a direct attack. However, in the starry Colosseum, The human-faced arachnids engaging in their life or death battle did not fare as well. They let out miserable hisses at the same time as flames burst from their bodies. According to the information that the Wraith sign was transmitting back, the roasting assault of the giant shadow arm had a relationship with the chaotic core of the human-faced arachnid. It was simply like that of a torch meeting oil. The two were even separated by a distance when the arachnid ignited. As for the other human-faced arachnid, number 3, it was burned transparent. Its human portion was burned into vapor and turned into a mist of energy. Then, its human portion was absorbed and consumed by the endlessly expanding shadow. The two arachnids were entangled upon the altar. Wraith sign could sense a bit of number 3's state. The information from its senses was instantly refreshed with changes, allowing Luo Nan to understand with greater clarity. There was something more real existing behind the terrifying shadow. Perhaps it was a powerful and hungry demon. The thing probably had not truly entered the logic world, but its powerful strength allowed it to clearly manifest its vicious and ruthless nature before everyone's eyes. The curtain of the mental plane wobbled and undulated. It was being twisted and warped, making it hard for Luo Nan to distinguish the real aspect and location of the demon. He could only make a situational guess. This demon was like a gluttonous old cat. It stood ashore and reached out with its paw to stir the waters. It hoped to catch some delicious fishlings and eat its fill. Who was it that attracted this old cat? It was without a doubt the unpredictable An Weng located within the burning number 3. Looking through the Wraith sign's senses, it seemed that An Weng was in a pretty good mood. As far as Luo Nan knew, An Weng's soul was within the burning flames of number 3. He was withering up without end, yet he was in a delighted mood. His emotions were sprayed wantonly out from his soul while he was surrounded by flames. If he still possessed a fleshly body, it would be the same as bellowing out in great laughter. And he should be laughing. He had waited for over 60 years for the transformation of the world, for the era of magical and holy powers. He had been in the order of justice for 40 years, and his faith had never wavered all this time. It was just unfortunate that he was encumbered by the old age of his body. No matter how much he understood theories and concepts, the slightest mistake would always bring him a great disaster. He was always blocked from entering a higher level and never even had the chance to fight for it. However, as the giant shadow arm came rumbling down at this moment, the incorporeal barrier that was always above his head finally opened up a crack. Looking ahead, perhaps his chances were still slim, but ultimately it was a chance. Moreover, this chance was already close at hand. The shadow swallowed up part of the starry sky, and Luo Nan was unable to make an effective analysis of its form. From An Weng's perspective, this was the greatest sign of all. He no longer needed to distinguish the direction. He drove number 3, who was nearly exhausted of power, to leave the battlefield and leap in the direction of the shadow. Under the threat of being completely burned to nothingness, Wraith sign did not pursue number 3. The current altar frame had turned into a messy soup after countless disturbances. It was incapable of stopping An Weng. As for the demon behind the shadow, it kindly accepted the food that charged directly into its jaws. However, this was not enough to satiate it. The demon certainly had an excellent appetite. After the demon had launched its initial attack, it discovered that there was not anything that could threaten its life. The congealing shadow began to spread as it entered into a net mode. It targeted the rest. It targeted everyone. Everyone in the logic world had become its target. The demon was driven by its desire for chaos. It would chase after what it found to be most delicious. If everything was tasty, then it would eat everything. The mist produced from the probing waves that interfered with the material plane had yet to dissipate. The dark shadow flooded its way in, turning the mist into boiling dark clouds that oppressed the logic world. Chapter 128, Shadow Realm, Part 2-2. Translator, Strivon. The quicksilver-like radiance from Fairchild's body interlocked with the dark clouds of turbid mist that came pouncing at him. The two forces collided, and it all seemed fine at first. But then the giant shadow arm smashed through Frost River reality. Its momentum did not end there, and the arm pounded into the ground. The shockwave blasted across, and the three skyscrapers could be seen swaying. Transverse waves and longitudinal waves were tangent to each other, and the power became even more intense. The rooftop of the skyscraper beneath Fairchild's feet was like a cloth being torn asunder. Long fractures suddenly spread, splitting in all directions. Anyone could tell that the building was about to collapse. Having experienced this level of power, Fairchild knew that he was no match for it. However, he remained expressionless. He just cast his gaze at Ouyang Chen. "You've been a spectator for this long. Was it to wait for this?" "Yeah, but it's still not enough." Ouyang Chen lifted his head to look up at the source of danger hidden in the background. It had appeared at last. The giant shadow arm had already manifested as a pitch-black pillar that ran through heaven and earth. It was like an orbital elevator that ran from outer space to an endpoint stopping at the ground. However, it was still hard to determine where its other end laid. The dark clouds of turbid mist spun and flew around the pillar, forming a vortex of distortion. There was also mist at its base that billowed outward. Though lightning did not flash within, a terrifying power could be sensed hidden inside. The following change in the situation was no longer something that could be resolved by spectating. Ouyang Chen had already begun to make a move. He did not appear to do anything special. Ripples just manifested outside his body and swept outward. The ripples were unstoppable. The dark clouds of turbid mist surrounding the giant shadow arm were split open, and the ripples directly assaulted the shadow body itself, causing it to tremble endlessly. The demon in the background seemed to sense the threat. A sudden burst of electric flame gushed from the dark clouds of turbid mist to cleave down toward Ouyang Chen's head. Ouyang Chen neither ducked nor dodged. His expression did not change at all. He just looked like he was opening his mouth as he breathed in, swallowing the lightning directly into his body. A crackling glow throbbed around his body, but it was quelled by the ripples he produced. Ouyang Chen responded in quite the effortless manner in this exchange of blows. However, he then frowned. This taste is filled only with greed and impatience. Fairchild asked, "Is it an extraordinary?" "It doesn't possess an extraordinary thought process. It's formed of pure chaos and disorder. It's more like a human-faced arachnid." Ouyang Chen's gaze flitted from the giant pillar to the shadow arm, to the circulating and spiraling cloudy mist. He sighed and said, "However, it's at the peak of chaos. It actually has the existence of a domain. In this sense, it's not wrong to say that it is an extraordinary." The so-called shadow pillar was a region of high interference between the mental and material planes. The dark clouds of turbid mist that surrounded it were similar, but the degree of interference was at an inferior level. The further away from the shadow pillar, the more the degree of interference dropped. Based on its ability, the demon was completely able to envelop the entirety of the logic world with its might. However, its outstanding instincts allowed it to distinguish between levels of intensity. It used the strongest interference to warp a section of material space, and wielded this warped space as a weapon, clashing it violently with the outside world. It was just like a lever. It used a relatively small amount of energy to leverage a power far beyond its normal limits. The dark clouds of turbid mist, the soaring electric flame, these were all produced in this fashion. This was a high-level skill. This was one of the applications of an extraordinary's domain. Ouyang Chen was not too pressured by this. Enemies on the side of chaos, even if they possessed the ability of the extraordinaries, were not worthy of too much of his attention. There was no reason or logic that could be described in chaos itself. Even if something could be analyzed from chaos, the end result would just be a shallow idea. It could only be used to fool an amateur. Even if Ouyang Chen wanted to research it, he would need to find the overall mechanism that formed this power of disorder. This would be a time-consuming process. His target was An Weng, and his intentions had not changed even in the last minute. Ouyang Chen began to rise a bit. His toes left the ground by several inches. He just levitated in the air without anything to support him. When one reached the level of extraordinary, even if one did not have the natural ability to fly, one could create an environment that allowed flight. This was done through the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. This was also another application of the domain. No matter where Ouyang Chen went, the substance-like ripples eliminated both the cloudy mist and electric flame alike. The ripples appeared to move unimpeded, unhindered, and the spreading ripples appeared brighter at the forefront. It shone with its illumination. What had once been a well-blended shadow pillar was now a bit more transparent. The forefront of the ripples that constantly followed rules and patterns were slightly distorted. The domains of the demon and Ouyang Chen had collided. The atmosphere in the logic world suddenly grew tense. The entire area was shaking. The rooftop of Building A was already on the verge of collapse from the clash between Fairchild and the dark clouds of turbid mist. Now it finally collapsed. The helpless and blank priests and knights fell screaming in quite a miserable manner. Fairchild did not have the ability to levitate, so he could not avoid falling down from the ashy and turbid mist. Fairchild spat out a shout, and his quicksilver aura cleared the surrounded area. He raised his head and looked up. However, what he saw was not Ouyang Chen, nor the demon who had yet to reveal itself. What he saw was clearly a human-faced arachnid struggling endlessly within the shadow. When the domains collided, traces of the dark-side life form submerged in the shadow pillar was revealed. Number 3. This human-faced arachnid had just escaped into the depths of the mental plane. When one tried to probe the deep sea for it, one would find it hard to trace. It was strange and baffling. However, it appeared again at this very moment. Its demonic body was ravaged and unwhole. It appeared weak and lifeless. Its entire body was aflame. And most importantly, it had lost the special ability to roam in the depths of the mental plane. Did the assault of the shadow pillow hit number 3 head-on based on sheer coincidence? Or was there a different reason? Fairchild could see number 3 struggling inside the shadow, but it did not look like it was struggling to escape. Instead, it seemed to be charging deeper inside. Fairchild could not refrain from being suspicious. Was An Weng really still controlling the human-faced arachnid from the inside? Acting in such a way, inside the dark depths of the demon's shadow, was simply suicide. Floating in the air, Ouyang Chen was able to see things clearer than Fairchild. He was familiar with An Weng and knew that the old man was not someone who did things roughly. Even if An Weng was overtaken by emotion, he would certainly have a fundamental reason for his actions. The clash between domains grew more intense. Ouyang Chen used this as a pretext to look through the shadow. He could vaguely see something glimmering and sparkling from the center of the shadow pillar. Ouyang Chen had found the reason. Ouyang Chen soon determined that the glimmer was the projection of the scales of truth. It actually did not collapse during the initial assault. Instead, it was embedded in the depths of the shadow, and its form was the same as ever before. Of course, there were still changes that could be described. Atop the black plate was the crite that controlled the elements of chaos. Right now, it was coiled into a ball and was at its last breaths of life. The mist formed from the elements of chaos had already dissolved completely into the shadow surrounding it. It seemed that next, the crite itself would soon dissolve into the shadow as well. Under Ouyang Chen's rapt attention, Human-Faced Arachnid number 3 was doing its utmost to close the distance between it and the projection of the scales of truth. The distance between it and the crite. The interior of the shadow possessed a terrifying heat and a corrosive nature, endlessly dissolving number 3. However, number 3 did not cower in the slightest. There was not that much distance between the two. With a body that was nearly burned to nothingness, with struggling movements that disregarded the cost, number made contact with the edge of the scales of truth projection at last. It pounced at the black plate in quite a desperate manner. Meanwhile, its malevolent and deformed mandibles opened up to swallow the crite atop the plate in one bite. Chapter 129, A Great Exchange, Part 1-2. Translator, Strivon. Number 3 suddenly went stiff when the crite entered its stomach. The raging flames around number 3 seemed to burn even more violently. Within the blaze, it seemed that its demonic body was nearly burned into nothingness. Its remnants pushed off to collide with the black plate. There was still a bit of the arachnid left to burn as the blaze exploded, turning it completely into scattered ashes. Ashes and sparks dropped onto the plate. Had An Weng turned into scattered ash and smoke, Ouyang Chen and Fairchild did not see things this way. It was just as they had expected. As the ash dropped onto the plate, the exhausted mist of chaos element began to gurgle and sputter. It rolled and billowed, increasing in scale. Then long limbs suddenly stabbed out from the turbid mist. They waved a few times, and the ugly figure of a human-faced arachnid stood up from within the mist. It had 6 dazzlingly colored pupils and 8 limbs. The flames that once burned upon it had disappeared. It seemed to be back at full power, though its size was much smaller than before. It used to be the same size as the projection of the scales of truth. Now it had shrunk by several folds and was around the same size as the crite it had just eaten. He took the place of the crite and severed the link, reintegrating the chaos element anew. This is outside of my expectations. It's understandable, though. This is indeed An Weng's style. As Ouyang Chen sighed, the chaos element was saved from dissipation by being integrated under the human-faced arachnid's control. The human-faced arachnid was transformed. It became even more efficient, so much so that it could absorb from the darkness of the shadow pillar instead of being absorbed itself. It could continue to grow stronger. It was quite logical for An Weng to devour the crite and substitute himself for it, but there were many intricacies of the form that was the crite. It was an extremely well-developed system of the order of justice and the best choice in controlling the chaos element. Though the human-faced arachnid was possibly on a higher level of power than the Krite, there were bound to be issues when linking with the order of justice's existing system. Only someone as experienced and as powerful as An Weng could have adjusted, made a viable alternative for the Krite, and succeeded in such a short period of time. The most exquisite part was not the rebirth of the human-faced arachnid, it was the integration with the projection of the scales of truth. The miniature form was not number three's body. It was number three's projection, coming from within the scales of truth system. The true number three had already merged into the projection of the scales of truth. It was hard to separate them. To do so would mean mutual annihilation, the utter destruction of the scales of truth's projection. This was a problem on another level. Ouyang Chen did not slow down his advancement. He continued to approach the shadow pillar, analyzing and clearing the area close to him, allowing others to see the situation inside. There were a few people who had the leisure to be concerned about this, but Zheng Xiaoro was one of them. This first oblatum remained calm-headed all this time, but in face of the constantly changing situation, there were many times where his brain simply crashed. It was only when number three devoured the Krite did he truly get startled awake. Zheng Xiaoro hugged his stomach. There was a mechanism that converted and connected his energy to the Krite, so his heart had nearly stopped when the Krite was devoured. Instead, his heart instantly pumped wildly in compensation. He was considered one of the fortunate ones. The surrounding priests and knights were all collapsed on the ground. They were completely unaware of how much the skyscraper was wobbling beneath their feet. Zheng Xiaoro did not know just how many could still be awoken. He lifted his head up with a blank expression, looking into the depths of the shadow. Under the dual illumination of the projection of the scales of truth and Ouyang Chen with his ripples, the insides of the shadow were being peeled layer by layer. A portion of it had directly evaporated, while another portion of it had dissolved into the turbid mist of chaos element. It could be confirmed, with a fair amount of confidence, that the projection of the scales of truth was utilizing the darkness of the shadow to rapidly expand the mass of the chaos element on the secular side. This was a highly efficient process, as seen from the situation with the scales right now. The projection of the scales of truth faced a change due to the unbalanced state once again. However, the black plate was the one that continued to sink down this time. This showed that the masses on the two sides were beginning to invert in quantity. Zheng Xiaoro had a vague recollection of this current phenomenon. This was the default state set by An Weng when he started up the evolution field. An Weng had even told him that perhaps a demon, as described in the Holy Scriptures, would take their place and contend against Fairchild, who seemed nigh undefeatable at the time. Now it seemed that the demon had truly come. Moreover, its terrifying power far exceeded that of the ears of truth. Beneath thick clouds lies islands covered with boiling magma, while demons bound in chains fly within the clouds. Was this the verification that An Weng sought? He could not see the islands or the chains right now, but there were clouds and there was a demon. Half of the Holy Scriptures had been verified. Then, cautiously speaking, did this mean that the gate of truth truly existed in Xia City? Zheng Xiaoro's cheeks twitched a bit. If they had come here tonight to just verify things, then their mission would be a complete success. They could leave with their accomplishment. However, it seemed that the current An Weng had no thoughts of leaving in mind. becoming a sacrificial vessel, stealing the sky and substituting the sun in open deceit. According to the ritual procedures of the order, An Weng, you want to. At this time, Zheng Zhiro had just reasoned out a general outline. It was atop the white plate that was steadily rising. It was built from the evolution field and existed behind the scales of truth. It showed its form for the first time. Becoming the weak side, what was atop the white plate was no longer qualified to remain anonymous. What first appeared was the structure of a kite-shaped shield. A quicksilver aura circulated around it. This was the projection of the shield of truth, and it undoubtedly represented Fairchild. Zheng Zhiro cast his gaze toward Building A, but his sight was blocked by the dark clouds of turbid mist. He could not see anything. He was unable to tell just what sort of mood Fairchild was in right now. But then came a change that exceeded everyone's imaginations. As soon as the projection of the kite shield appeared in its entirety, light and shadow manifested itself on the white plate once more. This time, the form was much more concise. It was a composite structure. It was a tetrahedron with an inscribed sphere and a circumscribed sphere. The format pyramid. Zheng Ziro's brain nearly crashed again. This Luo Nan. When in the world did he get on the scales? The scales of truth was not something you could get on just by wanting to. The converting and transforming process was very complex. An extremely tight-knit system foundation and energy-linking mechanism was needed. Only An Weng could engage in a similar operation. Considering the time, did this not mean that number 3 had come into contact with Luo Nan when it fled into the void in its moment of distress? Well, it did not matter how much mass Luo Nan took up. The side of the white plate that bore their weight clearly did not match the overflowing abundance of chaos element on the other side. The mass held by An Weng was not lacking at all. It was far too much. He could easily allocate the mass on his side. All he needed to do was withstand the pressure coming from the shadow of the demon in the background. Then he could endlessly reap more mass from the shadow. This advantage was a hard one to break. To this end, An Weng then added the final pen stroke to his plan. Atop the black plate, the human-faced arachnid opened its mouth and sucked in. It swallowed the surrounding turbid mist into its stomach. It was unknown how An Weng converted the mist, but what had once been scales in a constant slanted state actually began to level out. The scales swung. The white and black plates moved up and down. The human-faced arachnid swallowed clouds and puffed out mist. Clearly, it was calibrating its mass, searching for the point of equilibrium. Things were too easy with this much mass available. The white and black plates appeared level to each other once more, satisfying the conditions of the order's holy entity. It was like a ripe, plump seed buried in the void. A vague prayer incantation could be heard, acting as rain and fertilizer. The watering had a sequence to it, and it lasted until the seed germinated. Branches and leaves sprouted to form a complicated structure of nature, to form a holy space of miracles. Chapter 129, A Great Exchange, Part 2-2. Translator, Strivon. What happened? Luo Nan had been chasing An Weng with his mental senses and was observing the logic world all this time. He understood some portions of the changing situation, while other portions were half understood. When the giant cocoon of light appeared, he had a faint understanding that the situation had reached its most crucial node. However, with his limited level of understanding, his thought process was stuck here at an impasse. It was difficult for it to continue. He could only continue to raise the precision of his senses and observe earnestly. Even though the efficiency of this sensing method was far more wasteful than his recently learned life sketches by a 10 to 100-fold, he felt his actions were necessary. At this time, an indescribable light was revealed from within the projection of the scales of truth. One would not be able to tell why there was this light just from perceiving it, but under this light, the black and white plates of the scales of truth lost their countenance in an instant. Black was no longer black, white was no longer white. Some crucial element seemed to be drawn away from them, yet it also seemed to mix together. There was no distinction between them. It was then that this indescribable light noiselessly established a region within the shadow pillar. Its shape was like the cocoon of light that enveloped the three first oblatums in the beginning with the evolution field. It was just tenfolds larger. The scales of truth resided in the middle of the cocoon of light. Its light intertwined with shadow to form countless lines of various thicknesses. At first, the lines appeared to be like ruffled branches that were growing endlessly longer, some of which twined around the two plates. Thin branches spiraled and pierced the projection of the masses atop the plates. Neither the projection of human-faced arachnid number 3, the kite shield, nor the format pyramid were spared. A change occurred simultaneously in the three projected figures because of this. Light and shadow warped, and the structures dissolved into thin air. The holy space, an extraordinary exchange. The ripples coming from Ouyang Chen's body cascaded upon themselves, cancelling the shadow pillar's resistance. Step by step, Ouyang Chen made his way toward the cocoon of light. The ends of the ripples made contact with the surroundings of the cocoon of light, undulating up and down. The tempo of Ouyang Chen's ripples was not slow, but when he saw the growth of the cocoon of light and the changes to his ripples, Ouyang Chen was forced to frown. Changing from a small exchange using secular objects to a great exchange of the extraordinary realm. An Weng, you really do things in quite a remarkable fashion. However, you're borrowing the power of the scales of truth to do this. Did your archoblatum approve of such a thing? No response came from the cocoon of light, but Luo Nan felt his heart beat a little faster for some reason. Exchange. He understood a bit more now. The two sides of the scales. The human-faced arachnid versus him and Fairchild. Was there an exchange going on between them? No, that was wrong. After all, the two altar frames were still entangled. An Weng, by placing Luo Nan on the scales of truth, had bound the two frames to form a close relationship. Luo Nan could vaguely sense the border of the two sides of the scales. Chaos and order were becoming blurred. There was not a relationship of exchange between the two sides. It was more like a sort of blending where they formed an indescribable existence together. This existence was used as a foundation to allow for endless growth and development. As for the exchange, it occurred on a more mystical and mysterious plane. He could not precisely perceive it for now. But as the exchange reached the most critical point, it did not matter if it was the human-faced arachnid, Fairchild, or Luo Nan, they all could not avoid being affected. Majorly affected. The rooftop of Building A had nearly collapsed into nothingness. In the middle of the ruin of dust and smoke, Fairchild raised both his hands and concentrated energy into his gaze. At first, it seemed that the quicksilver radiance circulating around his body had darkened a bit, but he remained expressionless. Luo Nan was startled for an instant when he saw this scene. His heart suddenly pulsated faster. This was bad. If even Fairchild was affected, what could he do? Problems were sure to arise with his main body. The format pyramid structure was dissolving atop the scales of truth, which was an ominous sign. Here's Luo Nan's attention swung back to his main body, and he gasped in shock. However, his gasp was interrupted midway. Ever since An Weng had pulled him on the altar frame that was the scales of truth, Luo Nan was unable to struggle free from a binding sensation. Now this binding sensation was far more intense. His blood and energy was blocked and impeded, so much so that many parts of his limbs grew numb. Luo Nan's ability to control his body was drastically lowered. In contrast, it was as if the sensations of parts of his inner organs were reversed. These parts used to lack sensory nerves, but now a feeling of pain spread through his entire being. It caused Luo Nan's many organs to twitch and spasm. His entire body even began to shake, and he went into a fever. On the AR display, at least 8 graphs appeared with a blood-red color that indicated critical danger. The whispering conversations in the vehicle were instantly wiped clean. All that was left were the repeated beeps of the alarm instruments interwoven into one. Visceral dysfunction, hold him steady. Bai Xinyan gave out this order, but it soon became obsolete. This was because a lava-like heat came pouring from Luo Nan's head. It was as if his brain was boiling. It was as if someone had punched him hard. His mind was dazed. His consciousness was blurry. His mental senses lost their precision, and the scene he saw with his clairvoyance became fuzzy. The base that was his mind was being raided. Luo Nan strove to clear his mind, hoping to restore a clear head. Even if his thoughts were just a pile of mush, he knew that this was An Weng. An Weng had used the scales of truth and the enormous cocoon of light he had just erected as a channel. That old man, he had directly struck Luo Nan's Achilles' heel in an instant. No, this could not go on. Luo Nan felt the incorporeal net around his body rapidly tightening. Right now, his body was bound and unmovable, and it was cutting off his source of power. It was going to completely seal all changes within his body and soul. If that happened, he would truly be waiting for death. The incident happened too suddenly. Luo Nan did not have the time to think about anything else. As the incorporeal net was about to close, Luo Nan relied completely on his quick-witted instincts to visualize the format pyramid. He ordered the wraith sign to pull. Through the sounds of shaking chains, his soul was hoisted from his body, and he crossed into the depths of the mental plane in a single step. The incorporeal net closed, but it was a step too late. The instant Luo Nan entered the out-of-body state, he could clearly hear cracking sounds like that of branches endlessly snapping. There was also the existence of a substantial resistance. Luckily, he was relying on an external power, the wraith sign, for his out-of-body state. His method was pretty rough for breaking directly into the depths of the mental plane. If he was not this rough, he might not have been able to succeed in one go. Now Luo Nan's mind suddenly grew clear upon the separation of his body and soul. His mental senses stabilized. The most miraculous thing was the sensation of pain in his main body. Much of it was instantly eliminated. Yes, An Weng had seized the blessing of the shield of truth to do his work. Luo Nan, by forcing himself into the out-of-body state, had shattered the method powered by the interference between the mental and material planes. Luo Nan had shed himself of the shackles and was no longer bound. However, everything could not be perfect. Although Luo Nan had dodged a disaster, he had lost control over his main body. Before his body could be laid flat, his body fell backward straight into Zhang Yingying's bosom. It was no longer conscious. The inside of the vehicle was a bunch of bustle and chaos. Looking at the situation, it seemed that Luo Nan was going to die. Luo Nan was unable to change what would happen to his body next. Though he had destroyed An Weng's plans, Luo Nan had still yet to separate himself from the maelstrom. As long as the clash of altar frames still existed, as long as the scales of truth and the format pyramid were still entangled, it was impossible for him to truly stay out of it. Now Luo Nan's escape and its outcome were directly shown in the projection of the scales of truth within the so-called holy space. There the format pyramid still existed on the white plate, but it was much fainter than before. More importantly, the trend of it being warped and dissolved was reversing. It was being restored. This kind of change was not big or small, but it directly disturbed the state of equilibrium where chaos and order were being blended together. Within the cocoon of light, the growth of the branches stopped, and some of the branches even instantly withered. This was nothing more than the rise and the fall. Chapter 130, Inhuman, Part 1-2. Translator, Strivon. Oh dang! Zheng Xiaoro stumbled as he let out a long sigh. Everyone could see the changes going on in the holy space, in the cocoon of light, as long as they were focused on it. The details of the changes inside could not escape Zheng Xiaoro. He was well aware that An Weng had screwed him over. However, they were both members of the order placed upon the scales, so he was unconsciously biased toward An Weng. Zheng Xiaoro was a clear-sworn first oblatum. He was very familiar with their scriptures. He knew just how precious the holy space represented by the cocoon of light was. When they had set up the evolution field, they used external equipment to arrange the spell formation. Looking deeply into the spell formation, one could see that it was an imitation pieced together by machines. However, upon realizing an exquisite equilibrium, the current holy space had naturally achieved a domain that came from the holy entity. When the holy space was erected, the underlying masses, chaos and order, that formed the equilibrium with the scales all became sacrificial offerings for the exchange. An exchange that stepped into the extraordinary realm. This was the true road to heaven, the step to the extraordinary. The order viewed the holy space as a womb to nurture the Holy Spirit. As long as the sacrifices atop the scales of truth could provide enough energy, even an extraordinary could be manifested out of thin air. At the very least, every generation of the archoblatum was the result of a great exchange via the holy space. It represented the blessing of the holy entity and its supreme authority. It was because the order of justice relied on this inconceivable power that they were able to maintain a steady increase in the number of powerful members in their order. They were able to do this for the past 40 years, and this allowed them to spread their doctrines all over the globe. In this way, they became one of the top 3 secret orders in the world. An Weng went into deep thought. Right now, his fleshly body was completely destroyed. There was a 70 to 80% chance that his soul was going to reconstruct his fleshly body using this method. The most common use of the Great Exchange was to produce the body of the Holy Spirit. If An Weng was successful, then the order would gain another extraordinary in their ranks. Although tonight's price was very steep, it would still be worth it. However, there were flaws in the process tonight. The root of the problem was that even if a body was formed, it would not be extraordinary. It would be a huge loss. The branches continued to wither. Though there were some branches that continued to grow to compensate, It was impossible to eliminate the phenomenon of the withered branches in a short period of time. There was something even more deadly. This delay allowed Ouyang Chen to break through the last obstacle of the shadow pillar. He stood right outside the cocoon of light and was within touching distance. Though the holy space was boundlessly magical, the barrier it possessed was not strong. It was incapable of stopping the strike of an extraordinary. Zheng Xiaoro closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "An Weng, are you there?" An odd greeting was heard for some reason. Zheng Xiaoro suddenly opened his eyes in shock, but all he saw was Ouyang Chen standing outside the cocoon of light. Ouyang Chen reached out his hand and lightly tapped the shell of the cocoon of light. He was like a guest paying a visit, courteous and polite. Though his voice was a bit loud, spreading out several hundred meters, it was just as clear and as distinct as before. Inside the cocoon of light was a sheet of silence. There was no response. Ouyang Chen muttered to himself in thought upon seeing this. He increased the force of his knocking fingers, stressing the outer layer of the cocoon of light. As his strength increased, the outer shell of the cocoon of light clearly subsided. Its texture was obvious. It was like the membrane of a peeled living egg. Light could shine through it, and it could be punctured easily by a finger. Of course, the holy space was not an egg. Under Ouyang Chen's external stimulation, the holy space responded in a manner that exceeded everyone's expectations. The cocoon of light twitched and pulsated as if it was a living creature. It was like an enormous heart, with branches of veins piercing out and extending everywhere. What had once been thin shadows amassed together from the surroundings. The shadows made contact with the branches of veins. It was as if the branches of veins were coursing with living blood. They turned alive in an instant, pouncing forth layer by layer, shielding the cocoon of light and driving the shadows further away. At the same time, the logic world rumbled and shook. The giant shadow pillar that had smashed into the ground pulled up and was being withdrawn upward. The dark clouds of turbid mist churned like waves. It assaulted the senses directly, causing one's heart to feel smothered. This, Zheng Xiaoro was a bit stupefied. A different thought suddenly surfaced in his mind. I was wrong, and Weng isn't forming the body of the Holy Spirit. He's repeating his previous method. He wants to control to control. It was like controlling the human-faced arachnid. And Weng clearly wanted to have the shadow pillar, the demon in the background, be the host for his parasitic soul. He wants to realize complete control over the demon. However, the consequences of having Luo Nan escape revealed itself in this moment. Thunder exploded in rumbles. This was the roar of the shadow demon in the background. Luo Nan did not reverse An Weng's plans, but he had caused an instantaneous change. He reduced the upper limit of An Weng's control power. The shadow pillar was pulled up halfway when a buzzing crackling could be heard. The deep dark shadow clouds diffused in all directions, filling the entirety of the logic world. No one could avoid it, and this was no different than receiving an attack from the demon. Zheng Xiaoro's face went green. He summoned his last bit energy to instantly cast an incantation. A transparent barrier was erected around his body. It blocked the first wave of the dark shadow clouds of erosion. However, not everyone was as fortunate as him. All the Order's priests and knights on the rooftops were suddenly ignited by the dark flames when the dark mist enveloped them. The flames seemed toxic and corrosive. A few breaths later, they were all burnt to ashes. These people died in this wretched manner, but they were unconscious from earlier. At least, they did not die painfully. The Oblatum Knights, however, were the most miserable ones of all. The Oblatum Knights did not care too much about the corrosive attack of the dark shadow clouds. What they faced was not an external threat. It was the shackles planted deep within their body and soul over the past several years. They were vessels for the first Oblatum's mana, and this was also their source of power. Right now, An Weng's power was going through this channel to give them a blessing, one that was completely uncontrollable. The power of the demon was rebelling, and it was far above the limits that they could endure. Muffled explosions could be heard as dirty flowers of blood bloomed in various corners of the buildings. Several Oblatum Knights exploded one after another, and thus, the Order of Justice's elite troops in Xia City were nearly all wiped out in this instant. After the 6 muffled explosions rang out, Baze, who had nearly climbed his way to the rooftop of Building A, suddenly froze in place. His muscular body abruptly expanded to twice its usual size, and his muscles and bones creaked grotesquely. He ascended to the crumbled rooftop of ruin amidst his spasms. It looked like he could explode any moment. But in the end, his powerful genetics and the strength of his fleshly body allowed him to endure it. Baze strove to open his mouth. What had once been snow-white teeth were now completely stained with blood. He roared from the bottom of his throat. Fairchild. Fairchild stood at the other side of the rooftop. He heard Baze's roar and turned around. Baze's eyeballs were nearly bulging out from their sockets, and he was already half blind. However, he miraculously locked onto Fairchild's location. He let out another roar and charged over. With just 2 steps, Baze had crossed a distance of several dozen meters, and his fist exploded out. Fairchild's darkened quicksilver aura sprayed, and the shield of truth broke. Fairchild's well-built body was sent flying, and Baze chased after him at an even faster speed. He pummeled Fairchild with one blow after another. Die, 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 die. His howls were filled with murderous intent. He was venting the extreme pain he felt. Then later, he simply tore off his mask. Kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, come and kill me. Baze's twisting muscles were like living snakes swimming beneath his skin. It gave him enormous strength, but this strength was engraved with pain and despair. Baze knew that he would die, but he wanted to die in a way that allowed him some dignity. That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.